right, good afternoon, everyone. How energized or how tired are you feeling after this long, very rich packed, oh, Evelyn is looking very energized, this long, very packed day of events? Okay, we're gonna do like an applause meter. So depending on how loud you clap, I'll know how excited you're feeling about the day's program so far. Okay, all right, not bad. Not bad, not too bad. Okay. Well, as I think everybody knows by now, NGC Bocas Lit Fest is, we're very well known for having amazing fiction writers, poets, for the literary side of things. But we do very much think of ourselves and call ourselves a festival of words, stories, and ideas. And so this session is where the ideas come in, because as many of you probably also know, we have a series of events we've run at the festival for years, which we call the Big Ideas series. And this is where we bring together panels of experts from all kinds of backgrounds on all kinds of topics to talk about issues that are of, burning importance to Trinidad and Tobago, for the Caribbean, for the wider world. So this is our second Big Ideas panel at this year's festival. And really, there could not be any more relevant or urgent topic than this one, which is climate change, the crisis of our time, with a question mark. So it is a question. So that's one of the things I think that the panel will talk about. Would it be fair to say that climate change is the crisis of our time? Where does it rank in all the lists of other social issues, environmental issues, political, economic issues? We have a really diverse panel here for us this afternoon. And I'm going to hand you over now to Kieran Niles, Dr. Kieran Niles, who is the chair moderator who will introduce the other speakers. But just two things. I mean, not to single out any one person on the panel, but we are very happy that Mark Loquan, the president of NGC, could be here with us this afternoon. NGC, of course, is the title sponsor of the festival. It's not his first time on a Bocas stage in an ideas panel. And so it means a lot to us that NGC doesn't just support us with money, but they actually support us by joining the conversation. We'll pull in the door in just a second. That NGC also supports us by being physically here to join the conversations that we're having throughout the festival. The second thing to say is that one of our panelists was unavoidably, for very good reasons, which he has explained, slightly delayed. So he will arrive a bit late, but we are going to start the conversation, and when he arrives, he will gracefully slip in and join in the dialogue that's going on. So Kieran Niles, Dr. Kieran Niles, lecturer at the University of the West Indies, is as I said, the host, the moderator, the chairman this afternoon. We are in very good hands with him. I'm going to hand over to you, but I would just like you to give a round of applause to the whole panel to welcome them, and we get the event started.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. All right, so to the one person that answered me, thank you very, very much. Good afternoon, everybody else. Yeah, so it's good to have you all here. My name is Kieran Niles. Today, I have the distinguished honor of being the chair of the discussion, this moderating. Let's call it a homely discussion about something that's incredibly important. It's almost as, like when you're growing up as a child, I don't know if every Caribbean house is like this, but sometimes your parents would be like, we have to have a talk after dinner. And then you're wondering to yourself, who did what wrong? Yeah, so this is going to be one of those after dinner talks, but it'll be fine. There's going to be no pointing fingers and no blaming. I'm going to introduce the speakers. I'm going to introduce the speakers. We're all going to be going by our first names today. So I'm going to be, once I give the introduction, we're just going to have a conversation after that. I want to welcome all of you and the audience online. Please feel free to submit your questions online. Somebody's monitoring that. And here there's going to be someone with a roaming mic in the room to take your questions here as well. So I'm looking forward to this lively discussion. Let me begin with the introductions. Mr. Mark Loquan is the president of the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago. He's a chemical engineer by profession with over 30 years' experience in the petrochemical industry. He is also an award-winning composer of steel band music and honorary founding director of the non-profit organization Music Literacy Trust. Welcome. Vianney Marie Williams is an aspiring environmental consultant who seeks to aid companies in developing and implementing waste management systems needed for sustainable development. She is currently an associate professional in the Environmental Policy and Planning Division of the Ministry of Planning and Development and Public Relations Officer of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. Welcome, Vianney. Rosalind Williams George has been involved in NGO activities for the last 22 years and currently holds the position of Director of the Cashew Gardens Community Council. She utilized the green spaces within the community to pioneer projects such as the Cashew Gardens Homework and Activity Center, the Community Recycling and Composting Programs, the Community Smart Garden, and most recently, the Cashew Gardens Community Green Market. This market will showcase green initiatives as well as provide entrepreneurial opportunities for the residents of Cashew Gardens. Welcome to you, Rosalind. I'm going to jump right in because I'm very passionate about this subject. The basis of the conversation is as follows. We're not going to debate science because the issue is, the science is clear. The IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and if I use an acronym without saying what it is, please feel free to raise your hand and I will tap myself in front of you and I will spell out the acronym. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is an organization of over 2,000 scientists, have laid out the science of the issue. The issue is not really whether or not science is correct or whether climate change is happening. It's happening. The issue is who's going to pay for it. Who's going to bear the burden of the adjustments that needs to be made? So, with that in mind, my first question is simple to kick things off. Do you feel a moral duty to act on this issue? And how is it reflected in what you do? Who wants to start? Go for it.
The fact that we do what we do at Cashew Gardens community, it's evident that we think that we are responsible for what is happening in terms of climate change right now and how we as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago can make a difference, even in our own community. We believe that the problem really must start at the household level. This is where most of the pollution happens. And the practices that you develop at the home would, inadvertently spill over into your jobs at the beach, the river, wherever you go, you will take those practices with you. So what we have done since 2016, we have introduced into the community, the Cashew Gardens Community Recycling Program, where we seek to educate the community, every household, on how to separate, sort your trash. We have bins set up in the community where persons would put the different items. We also have a composting program, and believe it or not, composting is recycling as well. A lot of people don't think of composting as recycling. But in our community, we do something called a bucket exchange, where we give each household a pigtail bucket, and they will put all their peels and cuttings and thing in there, and then we would take it, and we have a community space, which is a compost space. And we get the youths together on a particular day, and we do a composting activity. So what we are doing is we are trying to instill it in the households and in the next generation as well, that these things can be sorted. The recyclables will go where the recyclables have to go. The composting will go where the composting have to go. And our garbage collector is very happy because when he take up the garbage, it's just a very light of probably paper and snack packs and that sort of thing. So it really, really must become a moral responsibility where everybody must take control of what is happening in their household, and we would clean up Trinidad and Tobago.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Mark, by all means.
Well, I mean, thank you for having us here, first of all. I mean, as a gas company, I will start with when you look at the global situation, the issue of climate change is as a result of many things. It's a result of wetlands emitting gas, it's a result of agriculture, it's also a result of coal plants, oil, and so on. But if you look at our energy usage, which is really what we're doing here, a lot of the energy contributing factors to the warming temperatures is as a result of some couple big things: the carbon dioxide emissions and the methane emissions. So really and truly speaking, when we look at this, we see more than just a moral responsibility to do what NGC could do. We see a moral responsibility to say that if this is what the globe is doing, we cannot be a company just looking forward and say, my business plan is X, and I have a 3 to 5 year plan. That's how we used to do business. And really and truly speaking, when you're talking the energy side of the business now, you see the Shells, the BPs, and all of these companies, who we could talk about separately, but you could say you're seeing them doing things that the language is 2050. So it means that we cannot go from point A to point B with 2 billion more people between now and 2050. We can't satisfy the energy needs by doing the same way of doing energy consumption. Because you see what the report that you refer to is showing that we are going off track. And it means there's an urgency for not only energy companies, but everyone in the ecosystem, from communities to university to John Public, to really get involved in this whole green agenda. So when we speak as NGC, it is really taking that perspective of, first of all, what difference can we make? We are a gas company, and therefore what you see us doing and responding by is essentially saying all our activities now is focused on pivoting the whole company to a greener, cleaner, more efficient use of energy. So you see us getting involved in renewable energy from solar and wind and so on. You see us talking the language of energy efficiency, of how we run our homes and buildings and everything else. And we are also talking about supplying LNG to the rest of the world and to the Caribbean. So if you look at the Caribbean region, you see us using mainly fuel oil and what we call diesel and so on, right? And we see we also have a responsibility sitting in Trinidad to also take some of the energy we have as gas, which is much cleaner than coal and oil, and say, well, let's also support the change in the Caribbean. Because if you face it, you're not going to go to pure renewables tomorrow. First of all, you can't scale up, you can't store enough energy in batteries, it's going to cost a lot of money. Is that the way to go? Yes, it's the way to go. But it's going to take time to get there. In the meantime, what's the best thing you can do? Well, the best thing you can do is build a bridge to the next side. And building the bridge to the next side means get involved in your renewables, get involved in the community issues, get involved in the youth and energy issues. But at the same time, realistically, gas, being the cleanest fossil fuel, is also a bridge. It's more than a bridge. In decades from now, it will be part of the mix. So this is not an either-or conversation as we see it. Okay. But we could debate that, okay? Yeah.
The conversation coming, trust me. It's coming. Vianney, over to you.
So do I see this as a moral issue? Yes, I do. And how does it reflect in my life? I think that as the current youth are growing up in a world where we're speaking about the environment more, and we're speaking about the impacts that humans have on the environment more. So I understand my home not just to be the physical house that I live in, but I understand the earth to be my home. Right. And just as I take care of the house that I live in, I make sure it's clean. I make sure it's, it's good to go, that I can live in a clean environment. The earth as my home, I want it to be clean. And I care about not just myself, but my fellow human beings. We have a very globalized outlook now. It's not just me and my family or me and my community. It's me and the globe. It's me and the world. We're all forging forward. So that's how it reflects in my life. I see everything I do in every circumstance that I enter into. What's my impact on the environment? As simple as even coming to an event like this today. Maybe you picked up a plastic bottle to drink some water. That's great. You need to quench your thirst. What are you going to do with that plastic bottle after? Make sure and find a recycling bin. Those simple little things are the things that are on my mind as someone who sees the earth as my home. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Vianney. So I have a question, right? In terms of how you view your home, this is the vision for your home. Do you have a vision of a carbon negative future in your case? In terms of, do you have an end in mind where we are actually carbon negative in your country? But in your own context, what does a sustainable cashew gardens look like? What does a sustainable Trinidad and Tobago look like? And for you, what does a sustainable world look like? I want to start with you again.
Yeah, sure. Well, we have seen countries like Singapore who was able to really, take a really bad situation. They were filthy, dirty, nobody thought it was possible. But they did it because the persons got conscious that if they continued living the way that they were living, it would be an unfortunate end. Now, we can achieve a zero waste society. We can. There are countries who are doing it. It's just a matter of how do you repurpose your waste. When we throw things away, like Vianney and I was having that conversation prior to this session, where is away? Away is a place. Right. It goes into the landfill. Right. The evidence is there that one single plastic bottle takes 400 years before it could deteriorate. Glass don't ever go away. Carib Glass would tell you, because we as a network, we interact with all of them. They would tell you less than 1% of the glass bottles, the beer and the Guinness and everything that goes out there, less than 1% comes back to them, right? It's thrown away. Where is away? It ends up in the landfill, it ends up in the sea, it ends up in the river. This week we had probably 1% of rain and Port of Spain was underwater. How? Why? And then I heard a certain figure said that we need to build bigger drains. We don't need to build bigger drains. We need to get more responsible on how do we dispose of our trash. How do we throw things away? And I think it's achievable because we are a small island of 1.3. Since I was a little child, I'm hearing that our population is 1.3 million people. And we're still 1.3. And, compared to bigger cities who are able to do it, what really is our problem? So it's just a matter of becoming a little more conscious, a little more aware of what's going on a global scale, because, we're Trinidad, we're happy-go-lucky people. On weekends, we just go to the beach and leave everything there and go home, and we go to the fete and the cricket match and walk away and leave a whole big mess. And it's about time we start facing these realities. It's not CPEP responsibility. It's not the CPEP, the city corporation's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility. And I firmly believe that we can achieve a zero waste society with the right education and the right programs in place and the right investments.
All right, okay. I'm going to go with you last. If you can answer, what does a sustainable world look like to you?
Sure. I think to me a sustainable world is a world where we all take responsibility, just jumping off of what Rosalind said, not only for Trinidad and Tobago, but everywhere, everyone understanding what is my responsibility. And that looks differently for different places. I think in the Caribbean, we contribute less than 1% of global emissions. And someone may actually say, okay, why are we talking about this? Why do I have to do something when I'm not contributing that much? And plus, I'm the one who's most affected, so why is it on me? And that's a valid question when you think about it, because we really aren't the ones emitting the most. However, if we are understanding the world to be our home belonging to all of us, we would want to play some part in it. And I think it leads into climate justice, really, when you think about it, because yes, we are the most vulnerable, yes, we emit the least, so who are we looking to help, or who are we looking to for guidance? And are they taking responsibility for what they've done? Are they taking responsibility to assist us as small island developing states? So a sustainable world, to me, is when everyone, everywhere, takes responsibility and in full knowledge of what that responsibility is for them, based on where they are, if they're part of the global north, the global south, small island developing states. That would be my answer.
Excellent. Ma, what does a sustainable Trinidad and Tobago look like for you? And how do you see yourself fitting into a sustainable Trinidad and Tobago?
That's such a long answer.
Of course, no.
But good question. But essentially, when we look at Trinidad and Tobago, we are a hydrocarbon economy. If you look at our economy, we're certainly dependent on all the foreign exchange from the petrochemical sector, the LNG sector, and so on. That's Trinidad and Tobago. Right? So if you take our context, essentially, if you were to ask me, well, how can that improve? And that depends on the time frame you ask me. In other words, the time frame, as I say, when we speak of sustainability now, as an energy company, is decades.
Right.
So it's not next year. But if you start to take a decade's time frame, there are things you have to do now.
Yes.
So if you take the now time frame, that has to get into how are we using energy, right? And if you take the Chile model, I went to Chile and I was being taken around to all these energy agencies. And the person was telling me that her child, who was 6 years old, was essentially questioning why didn't she carpool in the morning? And that, of course, started with the education system. But it's not the education system alone that makes this difference. So if you look at what Chile is doing, and you ask yourself, well, why Trinidad can't do that? They basically have the laws in place that focuses on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and so on. They have the standards in place which essentially says any appliance we use, any vehicle we drive, etc., it's going to be of a certain color code. So everybody automatically knows how much energy you're using. If you take the policies that are in place that is helping to stimulate everyone is conscious in the school systems, in the universities, in the kindergarten, or as we say, what's the word for kindergarten? It's not kindergarten, it's pre-care or yes, so they use a different term, but essentially they start at that level and they work their way up. So sustainability in Trinidad and Tobago is not only about what NGC can do. Yes, we can play our role as a gas company. If you look at our role in the gas chain, at least we could try to take methane out. So all the leaks we have, that's why we're using satellites and all of these things now. We feed an industry like ammonia. We have we always say we are the top fertilizer producer in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, if we stop that gas, there'll be no more fertilizer from Trinidad and Tobago, which is feeding the world. So essentially, what are the things we can do? If you look at those plants, they're emitting CO2. You can physically see CO2. So per capita, we're one of the highest in that respect. From an absolute numbers, not that significant. But if you look at what we can do, we can take that CO2, we can transport it, put it in the ground, and sequestrate it. And that's one of the projects that we're doing. If you look at the future, we can go to electric cars. If you look at the future, we can look at renewable energy, and we can also look at hydrogen. But those have different time frames. And that is why I say, even if you start all of those things now, which you have to, they're not going to come into effect until years from now. So you have to do really, the sustainable part of it is doing all those nice, good things. But it is also recognizing that in this climate, we are not in control. and the climate is actually due to global issues going on. And therefore, part of the sustainability thinking we have to have is how do we adapt? And how do we use technology to then say we could look at flooding, we can look at coastal erosion, we can look and see how our world is changing and how can we mitigate against some of those things. So it has to be both sides over the next decades.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So that kind of teases up very nicely to where we need to, what we'd like to talk about today. You spoke about the fact that we would need laws. We need changes. For those of you watching from Trinidad and Tobago, you would know that if you live here, we don't pay the real price for water. We don't pay the real price for electricity. We don't pay for waste, which is why we throw away everything just out the window. And you're very right, there's nowhere called away, and there's no waste in nature. Waste is a man-made concept. So you're 100% right. But we don't actually pay what it costs to treat that waste at all. We're living in a bubble protected by a subsidy. Those subsidies probably need to be removed. We're talking about transitioning to getting from here to there. I understand you talk about decades. Let me talk about the next 5 years. If we are going to get from point A to point B, I personally, and this is one of the few assertions I made today, I don't think we can get to point B with all of these subsidies in place. And to be fair, let me just be very clear, this is not an attack on the impoverished, the poor. Our subsidies actually protect the rich far more than they do the poor. The top 200 users of electricity in Trinidad and Tobago use as much as the bottom 36,000. Every day, the top 20% of electricity users in Trinidad, this is something that I was discussing with Dale Ramlakan from the Energy Chamber, and we were looking at the math. The top 20% of electricity users in Trinidad and Tobago use enough gas to power a petrochemical plant. That's possible because we subsidize the power for the rich. We subsidize electricity for the rich as well. So they benefit disproportionately. If we are going to get from here, from point A where we are now, to a more sustainable point B, I think it's going to involve a bit of short-term pain, pain for everyone in the short to medium term. And that's not going to be easy, at least not politically. Do you all agree? What do you all think about? Do you agree with that in terms of from the waste angle? Do you think that we should get to the point where people actually start paying for waste so that they make it? Because you talked about energy efficiency, but people waste because they can. So what do you all feel about those changes that we need to make that are not very popular in the short term?
Well, I'm aware that there is a policy in place called the polluter pay principle, or that is supposed to be in place, where the top polluters must pay for the waste that they generate. I don't think it's enforced, and I totally agree with this, because when you look at the corporation in my community saying to me, we could only pick up your garbage 3 days a week, because I was trying to get them to include a recycling day, either the Tuesday or the Thursday. And they said that they can't afford that. But I'm seeing the same regional corporation going into the business part of the community and taking up spending hours removing ton loads of trash from the business community. I think it is unfair to my community, because the businessman could afford to pay for a private garbage disposal system. And I personally believe that this is necessary. I'm not too sure how the subsidy part of it works, but definitely the persons who are the top producers of pollution in the country should pay to have their waste removed. That should not be the responsibility of the corporation or the government or whoever it is taking care of it right now. That should be their responsibility. Because at the end of the day, they are making a profit off of this, whatever they're producing that is generating this waste, right? That's...
Oh, when it's time to apply that principle to plastic bottles, it gets very, very interesting. But I don't want to keep us here all day. I don't want to keep us. That's another story. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. To add to that, well, I think equity is very important, right? Because we need to distinguish between equality and equity. So let's say there is a subsidy in place and it's applied equally to everyone, and now we have that situation you're talking about. So if we had applied it equitably, what would that situation have looked like if those that are using the most electricity are subsidized the least, and those that use the least are subsidized more? I don't know. I don't know how it is that we can package it so that it can be more equitable, but I do know that what you're saying is very correct, that because we live in such a subsidized world here in our little bubble, it has caused us to be very wasteful in all aspects of our life, including electricity, including solid waste, in all aspects, water, we are wasteful. So I do think that when you pay for something from your own pocket, you feel it more. So for sure, subsidies are gonna have to change. It's going to have to happen. How it happens and how it is packaged to us is going to be very important. Because although you said, you're not targeting the poor, etc., the poor is going to feel it the most. The poor is going to be out here rioting because I cannot afford to feed my family, but you want me to pay more for electricity. So therefore, we have to take all that into account. It has to happen. But how it happens, that needs to be discussed more and to be determined in an equitable way to decrease the impact on the most vulnerable. Yes, there is going to be an impact, but how can we limit it? Yes, it has to happen, it has to, but how can we limit it, I think is another discussion to have.
Excellent. Mark, I'll hand over to you before I say anything else. What's your take?
Well, of course, this is a very sore topic for NGC, right? Because when you speak about subsidies, who's subsidizing?
Exactly.
NGC. Of course, NGC is, if we didn't subsidize, of course, that would have been used for greater purposes and growth, right? But what we have is you're paying for gas, we are paying for gas, the people of Trinidad are paying for gas, and it's going, the biggest customer equivalent to about 5 ammonia plants, as we are talking, that's going in electricity. We're not being paid for it, right? On top of that, the cost of that service, that what people see, TN Tech is not getting back that revenue for that. So yes, we are a subsidized nation, and as you fly over Trinidad and Tobago, you can see a lot of lights on, right? You can see a lot of waste going on. Now, you might just take that for granted, but we are now at a point where what feeds that electricity? It's gas. We're not coal, we're not oil, and so on, it's gas. We are also in a point where the supply of gas is constrained. And therefore, because we have now reached a mature basin, we don't have all the nice shallow fields and big shallow fields anymore, and we are at a gas constrained situation. So when you're in that situation, any misuse of molecules, as we like to say, is really going into an efficient use of gas. So the best thing we can do is actually back off from electricity and make sure that gas goes where it should go for the country, for the economy, and that's in the LNG, the ammonia, the methanol, and so on, and manufacturing, right? So the answer is the subsidies need to be dealt with. How it's dealt with, of course, is not an NGC issue, but it does need to be dealt with from a governmental RIC issue, which is going through a process now. But that doesn't change the message, because I started off saying, what does sustainable Trinidad and Tobago look like? And that is a consciousness of the way how we use energy. So that gets into everything we can control, meaning the lighting, meaning the behaviors, meaning how we wasting energy, meaning the conversations we have in schools and communities and everything else. Those are the things we can control. We see, therefore, that we have a role to play as NGC to making sure this conversation goes beyond NGC. Yes. And this conversation, like these conversations, are important to say we have to build this awareness in this country, because we're now at such a crucial juncture in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. You're such a crucial juncture in what is being used to generate electricity, that we no longer have the luxury, essentially, to say, let's put 50 more million standard cubic feet per day out of the 250 just by inefficiency. It therefore means that we intervene in all kinds of ways in the background with TNTech, with PowerGen, with TGU, all the IPPs, with government, and try to make this point known. It also means that the renewables that we are focusing on, such as using wind and solar for the future, is also important, right? So,
All right. Just for the audience here and audience online, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, there are two things I wanted to make sure that I clarify, just in case everybody was lost. He used the term IPP, that was Mark used the term IPP, that's independent power producers. Those are the power producers that are usually, well, they are independent of the utility that feed power into the grid, right? So TNTech no longer produces power in Trinidad, they produce power in Tobago. So the independent power producers are independent of the utility. So that's what that term means. We have several of them in Trinidad, TGU and Trinity, I believe. So that's what that term means. And the other thing that he said that I want to make sure is not lost is he talked about us being gas constrained, and he said no more shallow fields. What that means is that, we used to make a joke when I was doing oil and gas law, that in something called the Golden Triangle in the Middle East, you could just drop a pin in the sand and this gush of oil will come out. That's not true, by the way. That doesn't happen. But the idea is that there would be a shallow field, that it's easy to get the oil out, and the energy that you invest, you get lots of energy returned. Right now, you have to go into deeper, darker, bluer waters to get less energy. And that's expensive, and we're now getting less energy, which is also driving up energy prices. Which brings us to this really interesting part of the conversation where, by the way, I'm opening the floor after this one, so please get your questions ready, online and physically. I already have a question, that's excellent. I'll come to you just now. We're at this state of play where we're beginning to feel the bind. On the waste side, we're beginning to feel the bind, like people realize that something is up. On the energy side, people are beginning, even in Trinidad, people are beginning to realize something isn't exactly right. And energy prices are increasing. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have the energy in stock to sell to make that money. But if we did, that money would be nice, And so you have companies, in Trinidad included, that have a decision to make. How do I plan to make this transition to sustainability, and what is the impact on my bottom line? This week, and I have to mention this, out of academic integrity, this week was a pivotal week for persons in my field because BP has made the most ambitious targets globally in terms of transitioning to renewable, but they scaled it back this week because energy prices are so high that they realized that their competitors were making lots of money when they were not. So they had to change their forecast to see if they can maximize revenue while still trying to transition. This is the kind of choices that companies are making, but also this is the kind of choices that governments are going to be faced with. And when it comes down to it, when I spoke about the price that you pay for the goods that you want, like power and water, these are some of the choices that we are going to be faced with in terms of what you sacrifice now versus the future you want then. So, the question I want to just ask the panel is, you spoke before about how equity is important and how justice is important. You spoke about relationship as you as an individual, you as an NGO versus the business community. I really want, the last question that I want you all to answer before the audience chimes in is, what are your thoughts on equity and justice as it relates to this as it relates to climate change as a crisis? What are your thoughts on equity and justice from your perspective moving forward, and just the sacrifices that have to, the sacrifices that will need to be made, the difficult decisions that need to be made? What are your thoughts? And really what I'm asking you is, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I think from our perspective, it would all boil down to education.
Okay.
All that you just said there, at the grassroots level, that information doesn't filter down.
Right.
The only thing the grassroots people know, the bill raised. Why it raised, they're not too sure. Because nobody takes the time to explain this to people. You might see the Prime Minister or the Minister of Energy on a 5-minute or 2-minute clip on the news saying, blah, blah, blah. That is what it comes out as, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, they don't understand. And I firmly believe if the time is taken to explain to people, why do you need to take the lights off when you're going to sleep? You don't need to leave the light on all night. Why do you need to put more into the dryer if you have to use a dryer and not just put one dress? Something that my daughter would attempt to do, right? Why do we need to get the entire family involved and educate them on energy usage, water usage? All of these things are very, very critical, and we are leading up to a very grave future. But if we don't bring the education in bite sizes where the people who are going to be the most impacted understands that they have a role to play too, then they want to protest, they want to quarrel, and they want to argue because they just don't understand. And so it is our responsibility to find a way to get everybody, and this is why our work is focused on the community. We will break it down for them, but I mean, at the end of the day, we're just one community, right? But we really need to empower more grassroots NGO groups to help translate the message so that everybody would understand that it's everybody's responsibility, and at the end of the day, we can all, make the changes that needs to be made.
Thank you.
I would say to that, first of all, I think sometimes it is, yes, that persons don't know. And then sometimes it's, I know, but I don't care. I know, but I don't care. Because I have these other things that I set as higher priority.
Right.
Very legitimate higher priorities. Feeding my family, getting to work, food, shelter, normal human needs that are, in their mind, higher priority to what you're talking about. But I think in terms of education, what needs to happen is showing how the climate crisis and the environment is connected to those things that you place as high priority. It's connected to you being able to go to work. It's connected to you being able to feed your family. It's connected to all these things. So I think something that we're very accustomed to is to thinking of things in silos, and especially in Trinidad and Tobago, for sure, in all aspects of everything. Everything seems to be a silo. Nobody knows what anybody else is doing, and then there's a lot of duplication of a lot of things because we just don't talk to each other. But when we come to understand that everything that we hold dear to us is ultimately interconnected and connected to the environment, and when we show that connection, it's helpful because it's no longer, okay, I need to pay the bills, but also if I use less electricity, then my bill is less, and therefore I save money. That's a good connection to make. And just one thing I would say is with regards to that information trickling down, there are avenues by which the public can take use of to be educated and to know more if this is something that you're interested in. But a lot of times we like to be spoon-fed information. If you don't bring it to me where I am right here in my house, I don't know about it, and it's not my fault. So changing that culture from a culture of passiveness to a culture of activeness, like actively taking part in what's going on in your country and in your world, that's a really big problem to tackle. But it's important because if we're actively taking part, then I would go to that public consultation that's happening in Arima, which is where I'm from. I would hear what they have to say and I would speak and give my voice. But a lot of times we may see, okay, there's a public consultation, not for me, I don't really care. But we should care. So I think showing that connectivity is very important, and that would help lead towards that just transition and lead towards that more equitable world.
Mark, what do you think?
Well, first of all, the impacts of climate change, there's no equity. So what I mean by that is that when we take our part of the world and small island states, the impact of the same issues such as rising seawater levels, the hurricanes, and so on, the small islands on that belt feel it. The damage that does to an economy that is a small island is such a magnitude. And what you will see happening if we take the data, is that the carbon levels that we see in the environment is rising. So if that is the case, then the report that you referred to, that's why you see that if we don't act with the urgency and we understand some of the things going on here, it's no big surprise when you see a wall being built in Miami, right, to protect the streets from getting flooded. But in a small island like ours, what can we do when those things are happening? I think education is a big part of the whole solution, as we talked before. But as I said, it's also about how we treat with the changing symptoms that we will see. And therefore, the answer to some of that has to lie in some hardcore technology issues, right? So if you take coastal erosion, if you take landslips, if you take flooding, the things that impact our economy, our coastal villages and so on, you will see that you can go on our Google website right now and look at some computer application, and you will say, all right, let's raise the temperature by X degrees, and you will see what that does to Trinidad and Tobago. So we can't ignore these things, and therefore I think NGC, from where I sit, we have a role to play in using that technology to partner, because we can't do these things in silos, as you say. We have to work with the Land Settlement Agency, the Coastal Erosion Unit, the EMA, the IMA, anybody who is interested in making sure that these things are visible. We'll put that on our website middle of the year, by the way. Preview. So we'll see what that looks like. I'm waiting on my team to show me something.
Okay.
Right?
Who would answer that?
But apart from that, it does get down to what can I do? It does get down to what can we do? And yes, companies can do what they have to do, but it's also communities and it's also individuals. And you can see now that 0.1 of a degree change can have tremendous impacts. I think if you take the data from, we are now at 1.1, 1.2 above the pre-industrial era. And of course, everybody is, of course, talking about trying to keep it to 1.5. But if you look at where we're heading now, at the current trajectory, all the pledges made by countries and so on, you're in the late 2.0s, right? 2.7, 2.8. So, and if you take the change from 1.5 to 2.0, and you look at the effects on maize harvested, food, the effects on reefs and coral and so on, the effects on plant species, vertebrae and so on, the effects of the probability of us seeing extreme heat and droughts and floods, you will see that magnify tremendously. And that was just 0.5. So we are now in the decimal points of temperature change in the climate, and as long as we understand that, and we can expect to see the hurricanes increase in frequency and severity, this has tremendous impacts on our livelihoods, our business, our economies, our regional viability, survivability, and that's why, I'm sorry Kishan isn't here, but that's why this talk in COP 27, 28, and 29, it's about trying to get an equalizing field, trying to get that financing that's required to make sure the small island countries can go through this wave from one side to the next. So that's a very important stage. So I think the sooner we can all educate ourselves and get it in schools and everything, that will be a big help. We will play our role. All our communication leaving NGC now, you will notice it's all green, right? It's all about these wastes. It's all about what can we do. We don't control the 0.1 and the 0.2 and the 0.3, but at least we can be more efficient and have a completely different disposition and not work in silos and things like that, and bring in a whole ecosystem along.
So.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so very much for the contributions. I'm going to open up the floor. I saw one question before. I'd like to take the questions in groups of threes. I already have 3 questions. So the gentleman in the white shirts, and then the lady in 2 rows in front of him in black, and then over here to the lady in blue. Those are going to be the first 3, and then I'm going to come back to Caroline in the first and the second group. I just want to ask you to keep the questions as brief as possible so we can fit as many questions into the conversation as possible. Go for it.
Yeah, well,
I try.
I really find it difficult to even begin. Because, first of all, most of my friends are talking about experts online and so on, are very pessimistic about humankind's chances of surviving this existential threat that climate change / global warming represents. Because, for instance, you just champion, talk about BP, saying how they had to change the figures. And those oil corporations are the ones who have us where we are now, basically. All right. Okay? All right. Well, that being said, next thing I want to say is government, right? The government. When I talk about government, I talk about those in power and those in opposition. Right. Call all of them government. Right. Are wasting our time, are not aware of what they have to do. And as a result, you find automobiles leaving the showroom without any kind of thing in place to use alternative energy, you know. It's just internal fuel combustion system, like long time coming out of the showroom, still, in many cases. And that should be a no-no. No car should come out of the showroom without having an alternative energy source or fuel source or whatever. Right? Next thing, they don't even collect the garbage. So people burning it. People burning garbage in communities. You understand? They were all over Trinidad and Tobagos. I ain't even talk about the protests, when they're protesting about they can't get water, they can't get this, and they're burning tires. I talk about people burning garbage, with all the plastics and the styrofoam and all kind of things. Toxic fumes created a whole over communities. Visibility dark, you want to know if it's mist, if it's fog, it's garbage burning. You understand? So these are the real issues we're dealing with. Yeah? These are the real issues we're dealing with. So the thing is, this whole Bocas Lit Fest should be focused on climate change. You understand? Because it is an existential issue. It affects all of us. I mean, we feel we could just go on a boat ride and we could organize the next costume for Carnival and everything fine. Or next fest or whatever and so on. And we feel everything cool. But then when a little rain fall and we realize that, oh God, the streets impassable. We board it, you understand? So what I'm saying is this. Is there any framework for activism to deal with somebody to call on the powers that be to do something? You know?
I appreciate it. Big up your co-style. There is the lady in black 2 rows ahead of him. And then the lady in blue on the next side.
I heard some very intelligent and sane speech, very sane and careful speech, but I didn't hear anything about greed versus need. The whole idea is that as we get more developed, we can have more and more comfort and luxury. We haven't said anything about how that affects the earth, because we already have more than we need in terms of efficiency, you know, but we still waste. We use more of everything. We throw away more. We have to start thinking less, and that is a very hard thing to do.
One more, then we get the responses.
Hello. I don't even know where to start as well. But I am following on from this man here about activism and literature. This is a literature festival, and only an hour before you were there was this wonderful poet, Celia Sorhaindo, writing about Hurricane Maria and what it did to Dominica. I've also written a climate change novel. I'm also involved in Extinction Rebellion and in non-violent direct action, which has really had a big impact on the climate movement globally. It's a global movement. The problem we have, well, first of all, non-violent direct action has been working. So much so, activists are now being imprisoned. The big problem, I think, is denialism. I wonder if any of you can talk a bit about denialism, because what's happening, you talk about decades. I mean, I would say there's an element of denialism in that, because we don't have decades. You know, and the other thing, when you talk about 1.5, we're 1.1 now. Okay, 1.5 is unsurvivable already. It's not going to be, it's catastrophic. So this young man, when he introduced this whole talk, he's saying 5 years is what we're really looking at. So do the math. That's like, this is an emergency we have on our hands. Okay, greed. You know, we're too comfortable. We're neoliberal. The whole world is neoliberal. So what I want to say is what we're having a problem is that people are denying this is happening. It's too big. We have decades. We will think about this. We must get together. Our leaders must do this. We must. We only have about 5 years. The other thing that we all have a problem with is unelected power. So we all live in different forms of non-democratic states, democratic states, but there's power above elected leaders that is the 1% that we need to, that are in denial. And finally, BP, Shell, I pay currently UK money. There's a war in Ukraine. I pay, and for my small, humble flat, I pay almost $2,000 a month for my energy because there's a war on. You can feel revolution palpably in the UK now. 6% are eating from food banks. Revolution is in the air because people are now poor, very poor, can't eat, etc. I just wondered, you know, denialism is being generated by the right-wing government, by the left-wing government. Nobody really wants to act. Nobody really gets it. People are comfortable. I wonder if anything you can say about denialism, because that is the problem.
All right, so just, I don't know who wants to start, but we have the gentleman that's, I think there's an overarching sentiment. Where is the urgency in all of the talk? Where is the activism? Over and above, I mean, and there's some local application I think we should address as well. There's the question about, do we have, as she made a statement, we already have more than we need. I mean, I don't think she's making a general statement about every single body. I think there is poverty. But I think I think just understanding the nuance of the statement is important in terms of what she was saying. Who wants to start?
Can you repeat the questions for the first and the second one?
Oh, okay. So I'll do it in reverse order, actually.
Okay, sure.
There's a question about denialism, and it's denying not just climate change, but there's also denying of the urgent need for change, right?
Yeah.
That's number one. I'm going to reverse order. If I misrepresent your questions, please tell me. In the second one relates to, do we really understand the impact that growth and the increasing energy usage, not just the increasing carbon emissions, but do we really realize the impact that that is having on the environment? In other words, if we were all to scale up our living standards and have these really, even Teslas, if all of us were to have Teslas, do we realize the impact that that would have on the environment? So there is a question in economics, it's called steady state economics, where we have to ask the question of, where do you stop trying to grow all the time and when do you get into that steady state? When is enough? Is the kind of question around that. If I'm getting it right, I think that's the case. So I'm getting a nod, which was a good sign. The gentleman that was first was asking about, he asked a very pertinent question. what is the framework for activism? And I think he actually talking about local. He's not talking about in London and in Paris. He's talking about here. Like, what are we supposed to do? You know what I mean? Like, serious. I mean, are we supposed like, burn tires? Like, what is the framework to get the attention to the issue that we? What is the? Sorry, thank you. What is the framework to get this? To have the urgency reflected in the issue that it deserves. So those are the 3 questions. Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll start. To answer the gentleman, when you think about Trinidad and Tobago and the way we handle issues on the whole, it's very sporadic and very short term. So something happens today and everybody all up in arms. How they could do that to the child? How they could do that to the lady, the man killer, you know. And then tomorrow, we go back to normal. That has been our pattern. And it's not that there isn't activism or representation where global crisis is concerned. There are, I could tell you, there are over 50, 60 NGOs on the ground trying to deal with this issue. But if we call a nationwide protest to speak up against climate change, pollution, flooding, who coming out? Everybody had to go to work. Everybody, as she said earlier, Vianney said earlier, you always have something more urgent to do. So while we sit in the room and the energy is high and everybody getting the information and the knowledge is out there, you feel sensitive about it. But when the time comes to actually do, we don't. And that's the reality of the situation. And to answer the lady, I know there is a movement, not necessarily in Trinidad and Tobago, called minimalist, where they're actually trying to look at their consumption patterns and see how they could scale down and live with less. And I think that is an excellent concept. But the flip side of it is the situation is already so grave. Can we or could we have sat in this room today and have this conversation with the AC off? No. And that is it. When all of us leave here and we go into our cars, my car is parked outside in the hot sun, I am sure I will have to put the AC on because I will be baking in there. The situation is already so bad that we have to ask ourselves, can we really scale down at our own expense, at our own health, at our own demise? Can you sleep in the night without your AC on? Open the window, a flood of mosquitoes will come in.
No, but you'll be okay.
With you? Really?
You'll be okay.
So there is always a flip side to it. I believe there are things we can do. For instance, we can reduce the amount of plastics that we put out there, walking with your reusable bottle and filling your water that you're paying for. You're paying water for it, so you're buying water twice. Why? I could never understand that concept. Put a filter on the pipe, fill your reusable bottle and walk with it. Cut out styrofoam. All of these things we can't do without. You walk with your reusable shopping bags and stop paying Marcy 25 cents every time you go to buy your groceries. There are ways that it can be done, but you know what? Sometimes we're lazy. Just to put the reusable bag in the car and walk with it, and we don't do it. It's not sexy. And then we throw all of this plastic bag into the garbage and it ends up in the landfill to become a problem for swim call and the same government we like to bash, And so to answer my friend here question, one time I had a friend from Dominica at my house, and my daughter, she had 2 small kids, so my daughter was going to fill the little portable swimming pool. And my friend was mortified because she told me in Dominica they can't do that because they pay for water. So they don't know about no portable swimming pool. If you have a portable swimming pool company, you're not getting no business across there because they're not buying it. And we could run the hose and just, the thing will full and overflow and the water running into the lawn and it's nobody's business because the water is not metered. Why? Up to now? And then when the dry season comes around, WASA will tell you, oh, I'll charge you if I see you watering your lawn. just meter the water so that people will have more control over their usage and you will get additional revenue. I mean, some of these things to me is common sense, but who am I?
That idea cost somebody their job, but don't worry. We talk about it. Vianney.
Sure. Well, I'll keep my answers brief, but to the first gentleman who had expressed different concerns, especially with the government's not doing anything and how do we get involved in activism, I can personally say the government is doing many things. When we go to COP, when we go to these different international forums, we agree. We sign our name. We say yes. We're agreeing to be bound by these conditions as a nation, that we are going to reduce our emissions, that we're going to do this, that. So we do agree, and then we put things into place in our policies. We have different policies in Trinidad and Tobago right now that align with many of the issues that we are speaking about. But the man on the street doesn't know, and maybe doesn't even care, because they're long, they're boring, they're a lot to read. I'm not a lawyer. Why do I need to read all this? But it is in place. And then the next step is, how do we implement that? And I think that's where the disconnect is, because we have these different policies that we are supposed to be implementing, and then the average Joe on the street doesn't see or doesn't perceive anything to be done. So what I would say is there are things that are happening. There is action being taken by our government. In fact, our government is one of the rising stars in the Caribbean for taking action with regards to the climate crisis. Believe it or not, we're doing things. So sometimes I think it's very unfair that we bash our government so much when things are being done. But on the other hand, we need to take our own responsibility in ensuring that they're doing what they say they're going to do. Okay, you say that you're going to cut emissions in half. Are you really doing it? We need to be our own watchdogs, and we need to, as you say, activism, come together to ensure that we hold our government accountable for our needs. They're supposed to be the servants of the people, but we need to ensure that they're serving us in the way that we want them to serve us. To your question about activism, I would say that that's definitely an area of, not miscommunication, but I would say it's hard to find out where exactly you fit in. I would say from my perspective as a youth climate advocate, when I became part of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, that is the environmental NGO that I'm a part of, through that NGO, I became exposed to really how the international forums work, to how this climate conversation happens. And I didn't know that before I was part of this NGO. It's not something that's really commonly talked about. So I would say in terms of activism, we need to know what kind of activism is needed. Not just going on the street and burning a tire, but how exactly is the best way to activate. So in that case, what I would say is seek out organizations that align well to what you want to do. So in my case, youth activism, youth involvement is my area that I want to personally be involved in and to help the climate crisis from this end. But there's so many different spheres that you can determine where exactly you want to go and what exactly you want to push. Because one person cannot do it all, and then one organization cannot cover the whole sphere of what needs to be covered. So that would be my suggestion for you. And I think for a lot of people, everyone listening out, the general public, a lot of times we want to do so much, but we don't know how. And especially as youth, we have time and we have energy. And it's to channel that into an area where we can use our time and use our energy to get the output that we want. So determining where exactly to put your energy is very important. So do your own research, do your own research. Find out where you want to go and what you want to do. And then to the second question, in terms of the comfort of today, I would say, because we so look at westernized nations, we so look at America, we so look at Europe, and we say this is what development looks like. And they're called, developed nations. This is what it looks like to be developed. This is where we want to go. We want to have AC. We want everyone in our house to have a car. We want to make sure that I'm sleeping in AC every night. Because in our minds, this is what we think development looks like. So I think it's also shifting the way that we look at things, especially for our Caribbean context, where we have the wind blowing, could be blowing through here all now, where we're different. We have different resources that we can use. So what does development look like for you? Needs to be a cultural shift, especially in the Caribbean region, not just looking like, oh, we want to be like them, but what does it mean for us? And then to the last question about denialism, what I would say, sometimes the alarmist words that we use, yes, it is urgent, but on the other side, it can be a big turnoff. Because you're telling me I'm not going to be in 5 years, look, in 5 years, I'll be here. So a lot of times, it can be a turn-off persons when it becomes too much. You're always hearing about it every single day. It's urgent, it's urgent, 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 and then it becomes not urgent. Okay, it's just going to forever be urgent, whatever. It happens. So I think we need to be very careful sometimes with how we present the topic. Yes, it is urgent, but again, I'll be here in 5 years. And it also comes to connecting it. Yes, I'll be here in 5 years, but maybe our coal used to be dead then. So how we connect it and how we communicate it to the public, to the average Joe, to the youth, to the normal persons is very important. When we come with this kind of alarmist nature, it tends to turn people away a lot. It has the opposite effect of, oh, everyone's thinking it's urgent. No, we're thinking, okay, you're being a little dramatic right now. Yes, it is dramatic, but that's what we're thinking in our minds. And I think sometimes I used to think like that too, until I really understood, okay, no, it really is urgent. But when it becomes too much, I have to step away, because I can't handle all this drama. So we need to think about how it is we're communicating to others. Science communication is a whole field on itself. How we communicate the science, how we communicate the urgency is very important. Thank you.
So I will just touch on maybe some big news, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of people would agree there's urgency required, right?
Yes.
But if you look at the same report that was referred to, and you look at what does it take to actually even get to 1.5 degrees, you get the answer being you need to focus on energy efficiency and renewables. And you ask the next question, what is the cost? And the cost is, well, you hear figures like $4 trillion a year. And we are so far from that right now. So because the technology doesn't exist to that scale that's required, and it takes a lot of resources to implement and execute those projects. So as a Caribbean region who is faced with all of these issues, I would say a big part of what is needed is to make sure we get the wherewithal. And that doesn't only mean money, it also means technical assistance, not at the back end when a hurricane passes through, but at the front end when you need to define these projects and get them done. If you notice a few weeks ago, the same fossil fuel companies, BP and Shell, were actually turning the sod on the largest Caribbean renewable power, taking the sun and converting it to electricity for the whole Caribbean. And I think the narrative of saying, well, you're the bad guy, and you are part of the whole problem is not necessarily getting a whole ecosystem where we want to go as fast as we want to go. Because the truth of the matter is it involves everyone. And I think you need the technology providers. I think you need to build new skills in the whole region. You start with these kinds of projects. It's the first renewable project we have here in Trinidad and Tobago, 112 megawatts. It allows well, if you recall, we were talking about what agreements did Trinidad agree to. And that is your Paris Agreement. And your Paris Agreement said, and if Kishan was here, he would probably say, well, they committed, relative to 2013, to reduce emissions in greenhouse gases by 103 million tons, right? If you look and you break that down, 72 of that is industry. Well, who's industry? That's ammonia plants, essentially, right? So I started to talk about taking that same CO2 pipeline, putting it in the reservoir and sequestrating it. I'm not saying, hey, shut down the ammonia plant, right? So the fact of the matter is, we've built up on our talent and our resources and energy sector here, of which we're now dependent on to drive our economy. But what we have to do is clean up the sort of emissions that we have in these sectors. In the same way, the other Paris Agreement is transport and power. And if you look at the power issue, well, we've kind of talked about being more efficient. We've talked about how that subsidize the behaviors. So we also have to address that. And the transport, well, that's marine, and that's also cars and everything else. So, as I said, this is not going to happen in 1 year. Even if you had all the policies, it's going to cost money. It's going to require implementation of some projects. And I think the best thing we can do is work together.
Right.
That's a main message. Work together and make sure in the schools we understand that from young.
I agree. Agreed. I have time. I just got the sign, so I'm going to take the next round. Caroline, your hand was up. Before I saw Daxter's hand. There's another. Oh, somebody has a mic over here. Okay, wow. So I guess he's going to go first.
Good.
I see two hands behind there as well. This was supposed to be the last. I'm going to try, everybody, if you can ask the questions, and we'll try to take all 5 of you. All right, let's start with you, then go over to Caroline, and then come over to Dax, then I'll go to the back.
Okay, so I would like to divert a bit the debate from the gloom and menacing disaster. And in other areas of the world, notably Europe, and particularly the North Sea, one of the energies that seems to me more promising is offshore wind energy. There is an IDB study that claims that Trinidad and Tobago is one of the countries that is most propitious for wind energy. There is a big question mark is where the money is going to come to finance that kind of thing. I wonder whether Morocco can give us some ideas where the money, the capital is going to come. And I don't want to interject the debate, but I think that all this talk, at the end of the day, persuasion about changing the way, persuasion takes you that far. At some point, you have to take prices, and obviously, Sinclair is not the same thing as Laventil, and you have to talk about mobility, public transport, and and somebody will have to give up on calling a taxi just 1 meter, but walking 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters to a bus stop. And so far, this discussion is not taking place in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to get all, and then we'll all answer one question each because we also, Caroline.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm a public health specialist, and one of the things we think about in public health is enabling environments. Now, I think one of the things I've perceived in the discussion so far is that a lot of emphasis has been placed on individual responsibility, and that's all very well, and I very much applaud the efforts that are going on nationally in getting people to be more responsible and educating them. But we're really not looking enough at making the environment enabling for people. So, for example, and we need to look at two sides of it. We need to look at mitigation and adaptation, and I've heard mostly about mitigation so far. So we have been talking about reducing plastics. There doesn't seem to be any kind of effort much on the government's part or on the private sector's part to reduce the amount of plastics being provided to the general population. So yes, we can all maybe bring our water bottles, but it's not going to make that much difference. When Hurricane Maria hit Dominica, one of the major issues that happened, one of the many, no, it's not one of the major, but one of the issues that happened was tons and tons of plastic waste because the aid agencies flew in plastic bottles for everybody. Okay, so you can understand why in an emergency situation like that, but but it just compounds the problems, right? So we don't have an enabling environment to reduce waste. We don't have an enabling environment to reduce the use of fossil fuels. My husband has just bought an electric car. Can he find anywhere to charge it around the country? There's only hardly anywhere, right? Hardly anywhere, right? So the private sector, who's selling the cars, don't really even know how to direct him to where to go. So I'm just saying, so that's on the mitigation side. On the adaptation side, I heard one of our speakers saying, we don't need to widen the drains. Well, I'm sorry, I disagree. We do, because adaptation-wise, we have to reduce, you know, our vulnerabilities. We do need to, yes, we have personal responsibility not to put fridges and cars into drains. We do have that responsibility. But we do need to reduce, sorry, we do need to make sure that we have wider drains and that we basically adapt our environments. We don't build so many houses, one-story houses, in floodplains, etc. The government has a major responsibility in all of these, and they have made some efforts. We did hear about them legislating against styrofoam. Do you think that's been enforced? No, we see styrofoam absolutely everywhere, right? So enforcement, and we need to get the government to reduce, you know, reduce wastage. So I agree with what you said, Kieran, about reducing the subsidies, but they need to go into reducing the leakage from the water system, for example, right? There's a massive leakage. So just a number of things. And by the way, I'm involved in a major sort of public health initiative on climate change in the Caribbean. And we're just giving results to chief medical officers and governments at the moment so that they can, you know, take major action on these issues. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm going to we have 35 more minutes before we get kicked out. So Dax, and then I'm going to take the two people behind. Go for it.
Okay, so I was just going to make a comment just on some quick point about electric vehicles. Don't worry about charging points. I had an electric vehicle for 3 years. I know exactly where to charge it. You charge it at home. Anybody who can park on their driveway can get an electric car. You don't have to worry about it. The range is enough to take you around the whole country, so don't let that worry anybody about that. Don't let anyone worry about charging points. It'd be nice to have them. It's not necessary. Buy an electric car now and charge it. As long as you can park on your driveway, that's fine. Okay. But that wasn't the point I wanted to ask. Kieran, I'm actually asking this really question to you. What's the role of the university in getting this information to people? We've just gone through the Regulated Industry Commission's consultation process on electricity pricing. I have heard very, very, very few stakeholders talking about the issue which you were talking there, about the inequitable use of electricity. And just to reiterate it, 84,000 households use 20% of the country's electricity. Okay? Those are the best off, the richest households in the country. 80,000 households who are typically the poorer households use 1%. Leave the subsidy in place for that 80,000 households. Do not touch it. Those people need basic electricity. Don't touch the subsidy there, just leave that in place. That's not the problem. It's not the 1% that's the problem. It's the 20% of electricity which is being used by the richest households. Put up the price for the richest households. Because people like me, we're the people who can invest in solar water heaters, we can invest in better air conditioning, we can invest in all of those things. So it's a very clear thing. We know that. Where was the university or academia's voice in the RIC consultation process? I did not hear it at all.
Fair enough. No, that's a good point. That is a fair point. This is one more, and then we have to wrap up because I'm going to get, do you have like 1 more minute? Oh my gosh, I got the finger. We have to go. I know we have to go. But okay, you can weave your last responses into closing statements. Well, just one more, and then we head off. We get closing statements after this.
2 comments. 1, I would like to thank you for this forum. I would like to thank you for being edified. I would like to thank you for all the information you shared. I teach at Arima Boys RC School, and I'm ready for the information, the flyers, and the time you have to expend to help share the information at our level. I appreciate the comment about beginning with the young children. I am in the forum of beginning with the young children, and we are ready. We have been recycling our plastic bottles 10 years and running. We have the iCare bins. We are doing our little part with the little ones, and clearly we haven't been doing enough, because we have been hearing this for the last 10, possibly even 15 years, and we're still talking about this, and we still need some more, so we need some more. So thank you very much. Give me all the information and flyers and pamphlets and everything you have. We are ready at Arima Boys RC School. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, you wanted? Am I going to get the... Sorry, okay, go ahead, and then...
Hi.
We have to make it really brief, but go ahead.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my comment is directed to the youth representative, Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams, I believe that there is a tendency for governments and organizations, especially in this conversation on climate change, to put a lot of responsibility on young people being the answer to the problems, finding the solutions, being the one to champion the future. Ms. Williams, do you believe that young people should be burdened with the responsibility of finding solutions for the problems of our forefathers? Thank you.
Okay, all right. You know, the conversation sounds like it now starts. You know what I mean? Why go do that when it's 5:01 in a minute? All right, so before they take off your mics, just really quickly, I'm just gonna, first of all, thank everybody for coming. I know some people have to leave. Thank you very much for being here. For those online, thank you for joining us. I'm gonna allow everyone to say a minute in closing, and then I will say a final goodbye. A minute in closing. If we can go this way, you can start first, because that was you can't respond to everything. Just 1 minute in closing, and yeah, and say goodbye.
Okay, so to the question that was directed towards me, I would say that no, I do not think that youth solely should be burdened with this responsibility. However, I believe that everyone has a responsibility. So it is very clear in a lot of forums that I attend, there is a lot of talk about the youth because we are seen as the hopeful future, because we are the ones coming up with a different mindset, because we are the ones willing and ready to do whatever it takes to get the world that we want. So there's a lot of emphasis on youth, which is great because youth deserve a seat at the table. Youth deserve their voices to be heard. That's something that is good and that is great. But when it comes to being burdensome, I would say that feeling comes when we do not see avenues for assistance, where it seems like we are the ones who need to figure it out. Okay, youth, come, tell us what you want. Sometimes I don't know what I want because I don't know what the problem is. I don't understand it fully. So help me to understand it fully so then I can tell you what I want. So I think in that aspect, youth education, we spoke a lot about education, but especially in regards to how things work and how exactly our voice can be best used, that needs to be amped up. So it doesn't become a burden, but it becomes an engagement. You are inviting me to engage instead of telling me to solve the problem. And in closing, I would say my sentiment to all youth, especially who I know for myself and I know for a lot of youth that I talk to, you feel this burning desire to do something. You want to do something, but you do not know where to go. There's so many avenues that you can engage in to achieve the outcome that you want. And just to plug, my NGO that I'm a part of, but the Caribbean Youth Environment Network is a great avenue for you. But there's so many different avenues in different areas that you can go to, but you need to do that little step of finding out and applying yourself to where you would be of best use. And that would be my closing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mark, you have 30 seconds. Everybody has 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Whatever the solution that we have to focus on, we have to think in 2 dimensions, big ones. What are the solutions we can work on, and that we talked about before, but also what are the things that we have to be prepared for? And one person mentioned adaptation. And I firmly believe, yes, we could talk and do things that are energy efficient and minimize waste and focus on IDB hydrogen and so on, which is a decade from now. And, I should say, and we also have to understand that Trinidad and Tobago and this region will experience floods more and more. We will experience coastal erosion. We will experience landslips. We would experience hurricanes, more frequent, more severe. Why am I saying all of this? It's because we have rising carbon dioxide and methane in the environment. As long as that is so, it's keeping heat in. And as long as heat is kept in, then you're fighting a battle of trying to get the temperature down. But then we have to kind of make all the changes necessary. And then you're also finding out no one on this planet or no country on its own can do it by itself either. So you have to be working at the country level. You have to be looking at the school level, the community level. That's what we'd have to do. And anything that we can play that role in, we'd be happy to also work with a REMA school and whoever. But I think we have to be more conscious as a population from small to say these are the things that could affect me. Because you know why? Very likely I'm going to experience more heat than anybody else. I'm going to be experiencing more floods and droughts than anyone else compared to my parents and grandparents. So while it's not fair for the young people to kind of bear that burden, the fact is they will experience it. And therefore, if we know that's going to happen, let's prepare them for it, but also at the same time work on the solutions required. And you see, the solutions required cannot be solved tomorrow, but we have to start today.
Thank you so much. Well done. Yeah, let's take the seconds.
Yeah, this was a heavy, I know we offload a lot on you today, but it's something that needed to be said. And I'm hoping that if you did not have the information before, that you have it now. We thank Bocas Litfest and, of course, NGC for providing this platform for us to speak to you and to get you a little more aware of what the situation is. And if you have not been doing your part, now is a good place. Now is a good time to start. Start by recycling. Start composting. Start doing your little bit within your own family, within your school, within your community to make that change that is so desperately needed. Thank you very much.
So can we get a round of applause for our panelists, please? So as we leave, I say the following. Number one, to answer some questions in blitz format. There's an offshore wind. The offshore wind has been highlighted as an energy source that is preferred for Trinidad and Tobago because of where we are. There is a wind resource assessment project/program that is currently on the cards. That should actually be Googleable, if that's a word. I have a map of all the charging stations in Trinidad and Tobago as of last year, but as Dak said, you don't actually need a map of charging stations because Trinidad and Tobago is so small that you can drive anywhere on one charge. The adaptation point about the white drains is noted, but it's not a mitigation solution, which is the point that was being made, which is fair. There is no EPS or expanded polystyrene legislation. What there is a policy proposal that is yet to make it into legislation. So please, if we can get more vocal as a society about the need for styrofoam legislation, please do. What is the university's role? You're 100% right. I take that challenge. I did not go to the consultation. I take my licks publicly. I will write an article about it to say exactly what I said here in the national media. Thank you very much. So the last two things I would say, therefore, you would have heard, I always like to define terms. You would have heard the term carbon sequestration. That term simply means when we capture carbon and we store it away, right, so that it's no longer in the atmosphere. So some of you all would have heard Mark talk about carbon sequestration. That's what he meant. It's a form of us taking the carbon out of the air and capturing it and then storing it, usually in ground, right? The last thing that I would say is I want to make sure that we are sensitive to the mental health impacts of the urgency as well. The last journal article I read on this, they found more and more young people are deciding not to have kids or becoming increasingly pessimistic about the future because of just how much the information is bearing down on them. So I just want to say that action is required, but action is not entirely on your shoulders. It takes all of us, as Mark was saying, And please, the mental health impact of this hearing this all the time is important to kind of highlight. So please don't feel like the whole world is on your shoulders. That's not what we're trying to say. The final thing I would say is that there's an all-mass competition outside on the theme of climate change. Please go and check it out and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thanks for joining us.
So everyone, before you leave, just a couple of things. A very important thing that I did not say at the start of this session, which, you know, getting a little bit old, the memory is starting to go, is that this conversation was in partnership with the Cropper Foundation, which is an NGO which has been very much at the forefront of environmental issues in Trinidad and Tobago. I would like you to give a round of applause to the Cropper Foundation, please, for the work that they do. And again, thank you very much to our panel. There's a reason why we call this the Big Ideas series and not the Small Ideas series, right? If this was a small idea, we could have dealt with it in 90 minutes, but it's a big idea and a conversation we'll be having for many years to come. So I'm glad we had such an opinionated and knowledgeable audience. So please give a round of applause to yourselves for your contribution, and thank you very much to the panel. The Old Mass is starting outside.